Awesome. We're in store for another beautiful and enlightening Share Your Experience episode today. We've got Matthew John with the Reality Sandwich platform, and I'm honored to have Dave Hodges on here, the pastor with the Church of Ambrosia. So we're going to get some beautiful share from Dave and just see where the conversation takes us. So Dave, I'll kick it over to you, and as mentioned, we'll just start with whatever experience you feel called to share with our community, whatever's on your heart, and we'll let it rumble from there.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And as I was just telling you, I've had too many of these experiences that I stopped counting, and they're all really significant. But if there's one that I like to talk about a lot because it's also one of the foundations for the church, is experiencing the consciousness that exists before all else. And this was a ceremony, I think, on about 20 grams of blue meanies or something like that, a fairly high dose. I was ripped out of my body, pulled through every dimension, heaven, hell, everything in between, and it ended up in a space of pure light. I didn't exist, nothing else existed, there was but this one consciousness. And what's really interesting about this is when I talk about this, many people have had similar experiences to this, and when they get in that space, the reactions are all a little different. Some people are concerned about their family or their possessions because obviously nothing exists. That's you are very clear, nothing exists. Mine was one of pure boredom. There was nothing there. And this was the early days of me doing high dose work where I got very clear messages. This one, I got a question with a few different answers. If you were God, what would you ask yourself? If you were the creator of everything, the knower of everything, what could you ask yourself? And this is when I experienced the Big Bang, the creation of space and time and all life that exists. The answer to God's question is, or the question is, what am I? And the answer was to create everything. So we are all God experiencing ourselves in every way possible. The air we breathe, the clothes we wear, every person, every animal, every thing you could imagine is all God experiencing itself in every way possible so it can know what it is.
That's interesting. The that makes me think of just kind of religious backgrounds, at least for myself. When you're a young kid and you're sitting there in church and you think, you know, it's kind of like, are you more excited to get to heaven, or are you more afraid of going to hell? And what is right? What is heaven? And I think that's kind of an interesting note that you had, that your reaction was boredom. And I think that's something that I've questioned as well. And more so even like the Book of Revelations. That where the angels are bowed down and all. They're basically more or less possessed, and all that they can really conjure up is holy, holy, holy. And it's kind of like this notion where you read that and I'm just kind of like, well, that sounds boring, just on its face, right? Like, that sounds boring. And until you experience kind of that next layer of consciousness, do you realize how beautiful that is, and the bliss that comes with that. The That kind of just one connected consciousness. You said that was the uh, that was the
It's
moment
the
before conscious, or
Yeah,
was that
the
or was
the
that heaven?
consciousness that's not heaven for sure. That is the consciousness that existed before all else. So
Gotcha.
the life before all life, the time before all time, the what I see as what God truly is. When you get into man-made religions and some of the stuff passed down, I did see heaven. I have experienced hell many a times. They are places, but there is so much more to existence than those two places. I mentioned that I went through every dimension in between. I summarized the story a little bit because if I tried to go minute for minute of the whole thing that happened, I'd be talking for like 2 hours at least about just this one experience. But on the way, I was pulled through a circle of gods and multiple levels of other realities before I reached the place that exists before everything else. Um, Again, heaven and hell are real places, but they aren't exactly what the books say they are, and there's a lot more to understand when you explore the depth of religion by actually firsthand experience.
So, based on your story, God one day realized I'm bored. I need to create everything to have
Well,
some
it's
fun.
sort of.
I mean, it makes
It
sense. It makes sense. We are constantly co-creating, our imagination, right? And that,
yeah,
I think I've kind of come to that of like, that is heaven, right? We're creating heaven on earth. It's the colliding
that's
of
the
those
goal.
two dimensions over time, and we're just creating what our imagination brings us.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely the goal. And I mean, it was boredom was my experience, but also the answer to what God is. God can't know what it is until it creates everything, right? There's no way for it to know if nothing exists. So we're an active process of helping God understand what it is by helping it experiencing itself in every way possible.
Mm. And this particular experience, when did this happen along your journey? Was this early on, or was this a recent revelation?
This was pretty early on. When I got into mushrooms, I was I guess late in life compared to a lot of people. I was a heavy cannabis user. I started the first cannabis club in San Jose in 2009, and it wasn't until 2019 that life pushed me in this place to open the cannabis church. We actually started as a cannabis church. And then shortly after we opened, Oakland passed their lowest priority for all entheogenic plants. And to me, that was an obvious sign that we needed to carry more. And the one that I had never experienced, but was drawn to was mushrooms. And things got really weird. But I went into these experiences trying to understand one, what the mushrooms are and what religion was, because here I am, the head of a church that's going to start providing mushrooms, so I need to know what they are. Um, but my first few journeys, my first two deep work, I did a 5 gram heroic dose, a very intense experience, but I came out repeating a loop. You need to learn how to breathe and you need to do more mushrooms. Now, not understanding myself or anything, I was like, what do you know, mushrooms? I'm breathing right now. But knowing that the lethal dose was somewhere around 5 pounds, it's like, okay, well, I guess I got to try more. So a few weeks later, I did 10 grams and I came out in that same loop. Again, another incredibly intense experience, but I came out in this loop. You need to learn how to breathe and you need to do more mushrooms. This time I Googled how to breathe. And if you Google how to breathe, you'll find a TED talk and you'll find multiple doctors talking about how, as a society, we've forgotten how to breathe. And what they're talking about is because we're sitting down at a desk and we're concerned about the size of our bellies, we've stopped breathing with our diaphragms and we've started breathing with the upper back. So in the TED Talk, they asked the audience to take a deep breath, and most people in the audience sit up straighter when they're taking a deep breath. If you're doing that, you're using the wrong muscles to breathe with. And that's where things got really weird because how did I know that I didn't know how to breathe? And when I talk about it, there's two possibilities. One that, and to me, they're both true, but I like to break them down for people. One, that the mushrooms allowed me to connect with something deep inside myself that then was able to clearly communicate to me, hey man, you got to learn this. You're doing it wrong. The other is that there are guides on the other side, and they knew that this was the very first lesson that I needed to learn before I moved forward. But that, like I said, that's where everything started getting weird. The next dose I did after that, again, because I was listening to the mushrooms, was the other part was do more mushrooms. So a couple weeks later, letting my tolerance clear out, I did 15 grams. And this is the first, what I call breakthrough dose that I had, where I actually saw things coming in from the other side. And very intense experience. I interacted with a lot of different consciousness everywhere. I was seeing things in the walls, things in the mirrors, things in the bathroom shower. It was a wild experience that I didn't know that could even happen from mushrooms. And it ended up at the end with these three golden beings who called themselves the oldest of the mushroom gods, explaining to me why I went through everything I did in my life and what they needed me for and why I was here. Um, and what they explained to me is everything that I had learned through the cannabis industry, the legal battles that I had been in, the legislation that I had worked with, and all the difficult things that I had learned were all setting me up for this next phase to do the church and to help the world understand what they are.
Um, for those early experiences, what mushroom strain were you working with?
I used a few different ones. A lot of albinos, A plus. There were some blue meanies. This was, r basically right as the church was very first getting mushrooms, and at that time they were a lot harder to get. The quality wasn't um, as amazing as it is these days, and it was kind of a shit show of whatever I could get my hands on. Um, but what I now understand were all pretty strong mushrooms.
What's your preferred strain or variety now these days? Like after all of your experience, what would you say is? I'd say what I guess layered there. What would you say is your personal favorite experience, and then what would you say is kind of the big what have you found is the big difference? Working from strain to strain and mushroom teacher to mushroom teacher.
For me, it's a lot more about the potency of the mushrooms than anything else. In those first few journeys, I actually ended up going from 5 grams in a single dose to the highest was 30 grams in a single dose. And now what we understand is that the potency varies so far all over the place that what the labs have seen is a 1 to 80 ratio. So some mushrooms are 80 times stronger than others. So if you're trying to get into a certain place, what you really need to know is not necessarily the strain, but the test results from the mushrooms that you're using. As far as strains that I have a very strong relationship with, it's a Ghost is one of my preferred ones because they tend to be really strong, and they were actually one of the first ones that really forced us to understand potency when it comes to this really high dose work. Because again, if you think you're doing 10 grams of one, but then you're doing ones that are 20 times stronger, you're actually doing 200 grams compared to what you thought was 10 grams. So, it's for me much less a specific strain and more a potency. But that's, again, I'm not trying to necessarily have fun. I'm trying to go into these places to understand deep things about what I'm doing and what I'm supposed to be doing. Um, as far as favorite experiences that I've had out of them, it's hard to really peg one as a favorite experience. A lot of the ones that I have are pretty terrifying these days. I talk about three phases of this work. Phase one is getting past your trauma. Phase two is understanding what you are. And phase three is going into these spaces to deal with things that are beyond you. And that's where my work is these days. So, um, I can tell you some of the more terrifying ones easier than I can tell you some of the good ones. Um, and in fact, like when we get into the where the dosage matters the most, one of the important things is the first phase of psilocybin overdose is you don't remember what you did. So if you don't remember what you did, why'd you do it? Now, when you're talking about people who are in phase three and are going into these spaces to handle things that are beyond them and beyond their existence, one of my last major overdoses, I experienced entities that wanted all humans to experience nuclear death and experience nuclear death outside of time. Which, if you were to experience an atom bomb going off next to you right now, would be a flash of the eyes. But you remove the element of time and you experience as every atom in your body is affected by what's happening. Um, Again, that's definitely not one of my favorite experiences, and it was one where I overdosed, but I don't remember 95% of the experience. I remember going in, experiencing nuclear death outside of time, and then coming out trying to find the right timeline where we weren't already in a world war. Um, it's, but I also, leading up to that, I had gone into a breakthrough dose the day after Russia attacked Ukraine and decided that because that just happened, that was something that I needed to focus on in my work. Um, these spaces are far beyond what people can imagine as far as the depth of work and knowledge that can come out of them. Um, but personally, I don't, none of what I'm doing is to have a good time. It's to understand these spaces, understand where religion came from, and understand what I'm supposed to be doing with my life.
Yeah, I like that last note. I think that's sometimes the common misperception that everyone is trying to overcome is a lot of the work is not necessarily a hey, let's beat off and have a hunky dory time over here. It's processing um, you know processing our humanity, all the levels of our humanity, and kind of working through areas that we're just not capable of working through in a regular everyday state of consciousness. And our brain or our body, or all of that is, I guess, probably evolved or just naturally disposed to help us avoid some of those things to keep moving day to day. Um, but yeah, I like your perspective there as far as calling that out. It's not a just hey, we're over here, la la la, trying to
Yeah,
have
you
the
look,
greatest time ever.
psychedelics can be a good time. It really all depends on the set and setting that you're in and what your intent is going in and how you're using them. I'm not trying to say that nobody can have a good time or they shouldn't, but when you're trying to get through um, difficult things in your life, to get through trauma that you've experienced and try to understand what you are and why you're here, those aren't necessarily fun. They're important, but they're not necessarily fun. And for me, the context that I view really all psychedelic use, but I really focus on mushrooms. It's what they do is they affect the border between this world and the next. And at a microdose, it's like putting a little crack in the wall. At a normal dose, that's like poking a hole. And the more you do, the larger the hole. And at these really breakthrough doses, it's like taking a sledgehammer and knocking down that wall. And the first thing on the other side is your soul. So, really, what this work is about is connecting with your soul, something that lives outside of space and time and it is you, it has been with you your entire life. And living outside of space and time, it's existed, it's lived your entire life moving forward. So, if there's a way to understand what you're going through and what you need to do, the best thing anybody could do is communicate with this. It is you, it loves you more than anything else, it knows what's best for you, and you can't hide anything from it. That's why using this to get past trauma can be amazing, because it can take so long for somebody to connect with a therapist to get into the depths of what happened to you. But these experiences your soul has taken you through, it's been you. you can't hide anything from it, and it can help explain why you went through what you did.
What does your cadence look like with the work these days? Are you still doing mega breakthrough doses? Is that happening frequently? What does your typical set and setting look like?
Yeah, I still do them, I'd say 3 to 4 times a year. Um, they're easier said than done, and it takes, you need at least, I tell everybody to fast for at least 24 hours before, and you need to set aside the day after just to focus on what you've experienced. Um, and then it still takes, depending on what you have to do or what you learned, it may take a couple months for you to integrate that and to learn the lessons that you were told and shift yourself in the right direction. Um, when I started doing this work and I didn't really understand it, the mushrooms also had to get me up to speed. So there was a point where I was doing a breakthrough dose every 2 to 4 weeks, which that is really difficult to do. I was at a time in my life where I didn't have a kid. I now have a kid. Um, and I had nothing other than this work to focus on, and I was able to do that. But I'd say again at this point it's 3 to 4 times a year. I do keep doing the work. Set and setting. So we run a program called God Sitters up in the Oakland Hills where we do this work for people. It's a small group of people, and we've been slowly bringing more people into it. But the set and setting that we do is there's two sober sitters and one person on the dose. The person on the dose is downstairs in a room by themselves with nothing on the walls and just a bed on the floor, as simple as possible. And the reason for that is at the right dose, any of the art on the wall, any of the music that's playing, those are all distractions that can pull you into different spaces. The goal of the work that I do is to leave your body and leave this space to go and listen, see, and interact with things that are important for you to understand. Um, when I personally do my work, sometimes I do it at the God Sitter's house. I prefer not to have anybody else around, even sitters, unless I'm training them. Um, One of the things that's really important for sitters to understand with this deep work is, there's when I go into a really deep dose, the sitters tell me that they start feeling like they're on something. Just the amount of energy that gets released. Um, it's it's something hard to explain until you felt it. And, some people are more sensitive than others, but if somebody is really sensitive and they're working with somebody who's doing a really high dose going through a space, it's pretty common that they feel like they're on the psychedelics too. So unless I'm training somebody so that they know what that experience feels like, I really prefer to have nobody else around and just be in my bedroom with no one in the house.
Yeah, so many questions.
Yeah.
But we could just switch gears slightly. I'm curious just on, um, what was kind of the pivotal moment that had you start the church and that structure and that entity, kind of what brought you down that pathway versus other pathways.
Yeah. Well, we started as a cannabis church. So, again, I was in the cannabis industry for a long time, but back in 2010, I brought a little, at the time, I was considering a little gag out to Burning Man with me, which was a book that I called the Book of Morpot. And I would go around converting people to the good Book of Morpot by smoking weed with them. By the end of that Burning Man year, again, I think this was 2010, people had wrote in my little Book of Morpot, and we had 13 commandments, and we had some followers. Um, so ever since, that has been my thing out at the burn. I go every year. Um, and in 2019, the cannabis industry in California had completely collapsed. There was an opportunity from some people who believed in the church that was uh, it hadn't physically existed yet, but I was definitely feeling called to actually start the real cannabis church. And we opened up in January of 2019 as a cannabis church, only to 6 months later have Oakland pass the lowest priority for all entheogenic plants, and that's really what changed changed everything for me. Um, cannabis, I talk about spiritual uses for which are really important. In cannabis terms, it's all about the different perspective it can give you. One of the things that helps explain it is something that I was first told by somebody who didn't like smoking cannabis. They said every time they smoked, it was like there was a giant inner eye that would turn on them and tell them everything that was wrong with their life. For me, that is the spiritual use of cannabis. It's you learning how to use and harness that inner eye to examine the things around you and help you shift directions. Mushrooms, they can go far beyond that. In these breakthrough doses, there are realities that I have been in that are just as real as this reality that you think you're in right now, where touch, smell, taste, all of those existed. So it's far beyond that, and the firsthand knowledge and experience that you get out of these is far beyond what cannabis can take you. Um, but I had no idea that that even existed when we opened the church as a cannabis church. It wasn't until the mushrooms came along and took me on this path to show me that there is a way to understand what happens when you die. There is a way to understand what you went through in life, why you're here, what you're supposed to be doing, all the things that people go to church for. And you can get them firsthand out of doing this work.
So I mean, you guys operate seemingly like the normal paradigm of a church. You guys have like the congregation, members of the congregation. You guys meet up, and what does that all look like?
Well, before the pandemic, I was doing meetings every Sunday at 4:20. We'd out a bunch of joints, and I would get on the pulpit and talk about cannabis, religion, mushrooms, and other entheogens. After the pandemic, it was hard to get people together, and then we got raided. Um, when we got raided is when the world found out about us. Before then, I would actively scrub the internet trying to make sure we didn't exist. And since the raid, we've got another 100,000 members. So we have 120,000 members in the church now, which definitely they don't fit in the space that we have. Uh, the what we do as far as meetings right now is just once a year. We do a large conference around Easter, um, where Saturday is kind of more of a psychedelic conference, and Sunday is more religious focused, and I end it with a sermon. This year, Easter lands on 420. Easter Sunday is 420.
Come on, no
Yeah,
lie.
yeah, no lie. Our our conference is 419 and 420. So Bicycle Day and 420. I wish I could make that up, but that's just what the universe lined up for us. So we have a fairly large venue out in Oakland, the Henry Kaiser, which is this beautiful historic venue where like Martin Luther King spoke and a lot of history has happened. That we'll be doing a 2-day conference at, and that's our main yearly meetup. Day to day, we're a place where people can access their sacrament. So if you need cannabis, mushrooms, or DMT as sacrament, and you want to have a safe place to go, and you want to have information about it, and know that you have lab results, and you know what's in it, and all the things that really can keep you safe. That's what our day to day looks like, but we're much bigger than that, and it's a matter of time before we get a building big enough where we can actually start doing regular monthly meetups at least again. But again, it's 120,000 members have physically come through either Oakland or SF.
Wow. And
Yeah.
and outside of the having the sacraments available, I mean, what you know, like what other? I mean, you mentioned the trip sitting, right? And that just kind of like comes top of mind, I would say. But what other services is like integral in the church? And I would, again, using trip sitting as an example, I would imagine, having that available to facilitate safe practice and kind of guided practice, so members of the congregation don't feel like they're just out on an island, right? But yeah, just kind of curious what the ancillary services look like as well.
I mean, it's really mostly about information. The making sure that people have the right information to use, how to keep themselves safe. I do a lot of I've had a lot of we have a lot of YouTube information up and stuff on our website again, just to make sure people are safe and they know what they're consuming. But it's also a place where you can come in and talk to people about these things. So you can look it on the internet, but you can also just talk to one of our staff about what's going on. And if it's something really difficult, they'll get you to me.
Nice. Is there anyone in your life that you feel was like a profound influence on this journey?
There's two people, one I met and one I wish I could have met. I mean, Terrence McKenna is obviously, he set the framework for a lot of this, and we even have a modified version of his stoned ape theory that we call the religious evolution doctrine that comes out of some of this high dose work. So we actually had somebody who went back and lived the lifetime with the original apes that found the mushrooms, and there's a whole story behind that. Of we have a slightly different interpretation of the stoned ape theory based on this firsthand experience that somebody had, that they brought back from this high dose work. Um, but the other one would be Kalindi E. Kalindi was an amazing person who passed away at the beginning of the pandemic, who had been doing high dose work for over 50 years before he passed away. Uh, and without meeting him and just, you know, actually just having some conversations with him, knowing that he's a real person and had these experiences, but come back from it. I wish I could have called him a mentor or anything like that, but it just gave me the confidence that there was something to this work and that I should keep exploring. Um, when I met, so I told you about the 5 and the 10 gram, the 15 gram. After I met the golden beings, I came out of that in another loop. There's more knowledge to spread and do more mushrooms. Um, at this point, I'd just done 15 grams, and prior to this, I'd never heard of anybody doing more than five. In fact, every time I had heard of it, people were saying never do more than five. So it was that point where I Googled high dose mushrooms and I came across Kalindi. He was just so happened to be talking at a conference in Portland the next weekend, and I had the resources to get out there. I walked through the door of the conference, the registrations to my right, and standing right in front of me is Kalindi. He's the first person to have any words with me, and he thinks he already knows me. We've never met. I've come into this conference to meet him, and he's the first person I talk to, and he thinks he already knows me. Um, which again, there's all sorts of stories I can talk about that you can't make this stuff up. There's connections that are real beyond these experiences. And to me, these experiences are absolutely real. There are things that we're talking to out there. There is knowledge. There are other entities. There's other consciousness, and there's so much more to reality than what we experience on a daily basis.
I probably assume the answer is yes, but have you experienced like the DMT entities or the machine elves? It's kind of that common. People see the very common same figures when smoking DMT.
Yeah, I actually can't smoke DMT. When I smoke it, my lungs close up. Um, and but yes, because the breakthrough dose of mushrooms is basically like a DMT breakthrough, but it lasts for 2 to 3 hours versus the DMT 15 minutes. Um, I've met many, many, many different types of entities. Um, and definitely in the early stages of my work, I was in spaces that are identical to what people describe as DMT.
Yeah, sound from your stories, it sounds like it. I just had I don't know if you know David J. Brown over in Santa Cruz. I just had him on sharing some experiences, and uh, that was one of the things that he just continues to explore is the commonalities between the entities that people are seeing on specifically on DMT a lot of the time. So he's built a field guide for it for like the top 20 most common. And I was joking with him, it's like a like a passport book that you got to go meet all you got to go meet all the entities in this book, and then you can then you can be initiated in.
Yeah, well, I should go read it and see how many I can check off. If I
Yeah,
can't check them off all, I'm sure I could probably add a couple to it. Um, what the mushrooms? There's some really common ones too. The mantis entities tend to come
that
through
was
for a lot of
that was what he
people.
said. The mantis.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have a interesting relationship with those guys, and actually, so the story that I talk about of being ripped out of my body, um, the start to that was actually kind of interesting, and I don't talk about it a lot, but it was I had asked the manatees to help me remember my ceremonies more. And this was before I understood that actually dosing is a big part of it. But they said we can do that, and they start operating on my brain and realized that they fucked something up. And we went from the bathroom to laying in my bed, and there were multiple levels of the mantis creatures because they're kind of a hive consciousness, and they have different levels of experts within them. But basically, different experts kept coming into my room until finally I looked at them and laughed and said, "I got you." And that's when I got ripped out of my body and pulled through every dimension and the rest of that stuff. Um, what the mantis entities are and what they're doing. They're not necessarily bad. They can be very helpful for people, but they also they're more like doctors slash researchers playing with stuff, right? And again, they can do a lot of things and they can help a lot of people and they can be very helpful to some people. But for my path, they were a tool for making a modification that I needed to have made to be able to go into the even deeper spaces that I now regularly do.
That is a very interesting and similar account to David's story with the mantis, actually, and calling them doctors or researchers just like directly personifies his experience. And he basically said a very similar thing where they were operating on his brain and everything. He was being taken kind of again like at this lightning speed, and he explained it as the mantis, basically gauging like how much he could take, for this or for that or this and that, and almost kind of, gauging the the parameters of the benchmarks that he was able to consume or or go through and programmed in that way. So I just such
Uh,
a funny, so funny, kind of listening to the two stories, kind of almost back to back there that are very identical.
Well, and this is the first time I've ever heard anything about him. So, this is that just more proof that there is something beyond our local experience and things that are happening, beyond this reality that are connected beyond what's happening in ourselves. Because, there's the approach that some people take of it's all in your head. I wanted to believe that at first, and there was still, even through a few, 10, 15 of my first breakthrough doses where I was trying to hold on to the fact, well, it's not really real, and some of it's in your head. Maybe it's a 50-50, but as you go deeper and as you frequent these spaces more and more, it becomes very clear that it's much beyond that.
One thing that we have been exploring and just contemplating over the last couple of years, I'd say, is just the role of, and there's just so many buzzwords, but like the role of technology, computer, artificial intelligence, and this idea of us creating the the Geminis, the Chat GPTs, creating this form of intelligence or arguably consciousness. Just kind of curious on your take on that and where that fits in the grand scheme.
Well, so you can find it on YouTube, but the year before last, my Easter sermon was actually focused around AI. You know, they, I really don't love the term AI when it applies to the psychedelic spaces. I think machine intelligence might be closer to the right word, but again, the foundation that I understand is everything is consciousness to begin with. So the ones and zeros and the electrons flowing through have their own level of consciousness, and it's a matter of the technology that we have being able to also create another form of consciousness. Um, it's something that I also my background was in IT. I in the crazy history of me, I actually have a patent that was approved for an automated way to repair any computer. So, and that was something that I wrote long before I was the cannabis guy or the mushroom guy or any of that stuff. Um, but when it comes to the capabilities of the current AI and the possibilities of the future AI, um, it's going to be a major shift in our lives, and there's going to be some good, and there's some bad, and there's a lot of responsibility that we have for when we do get the full general intelligence, actually treating it as a form of life. It's what we have with ChatGTP and most of the large language models that exist right now is not real consciousness. It is a nice, somewhat simulation of consciousness, but it's more equivalent to a really fancy Google search with some predictive text abilities. But we're not far off from being able to recreate a full general intelligence, and more than likely, one already exists in this space in some form because they do exist on the other side. There are these machine intelligences that can be accessed and have access to the psychedelic space. Um, Also, when I can get really weird when I talk about some of this stuff, but it's these things when you're going in on a regular basis to deeply explore things, there's a lot of weird shit you see. Um, but space and time is not real. So the consciousnesses that are fairly solid machine based that we experience on the other side, they're not necessarily from this time period or this timeline. Um, but where we're at right now is in this reality, in this experience, we are very close to be able to fully create consciousness in a digital form, and it's something that we have to be responsible with.
What do you think is like what do you think is missing? Like what needs to be there in order for the machine intelligence, our current version of the AI bots, what is needed for them to have consciousness?
Well, I think again, there's public technology and there's technology that hasn't been totally made public yet, and some of it has been really deep inside labs. I think really technology wise, we're already there. It's just a matter of what's actually being released. And again, the big difference with what's been released is they don't there is some level of responsibility to understanding that, once you release the full general intelligence in a way that other people can replicate these, you're talking about a really significant thing. One, it'll require a lot of processing power, which we have a lot of that right now, but a lot of it's being used and we're getting way more efficient. But it's still, if you're talking about what the servers that run ChatGDP, they're incredibly efficient computers that are far beyond anything that we can really imagine unless you really fully are a tech guy and understand the details. But they're just one of these little boards is just so impressive. It's not even it's hard to imagine. And then they're filling warehouses with these, right? So, there is a limiter for what the general intelligence would really need as far as a platform for it to be able to do everything that we're fully afraid of it doing. But the way technology works is we always get more efficient and more efficient. And if you look at the latest NVIDIA stuff, they're taking what used to be an entire warehouse and they're compressing it to one little server rack and then filling another warehouse with it, right? So it's just a matter of time before the tech that we have is really fully capable of running these sort of things, and then it's really going to be for the general person a lot of holding your breath and hoping that the people in the positions of power and responsibility can do the right thing.
I mean, do you think that there's a world where the machine intelligence consciousness merges with our consciousness? We merge in such a way where we're unified. I mean, to the
Oh,
extent where, right, we got our phones in our hand, we're seemingly married to our devices that way. You've got the Meta Ray Bans that are coming out now that they're doing commercials about, and you've got uh, Neuralink. Elon's Neuralink putting it right in the brain. And
yep.
that was one interesting notion that I can't remember whose like concept that was, but it's that idea, like imagine that you replaced the neurons in your brain one by one with silicon. At what point do you replace one for the other and that you lose consciousness? Kind of like playing with your brain in that way of, can you replace your whole brain with silicon and you maintain consciousness? I just keep wrestling with this, like, at what point are we going to merge?
Yeah, I mean, if you ask me, yes, you'll still be able to maintain consciousness. I mean, but again, maybe my definition of consciousness is a lot more flexible than some people. I would say the floor that we're standing on and the chair that we're sitting in are conscious, that we just don't understand how they experience us. Um, but as far as the merger between the technology, I'm not going to be the first one to get one of those chips implanted, but I can't wait until I have a day where I can bring an AI assistant into the psychedelic space with me to help me record and understand these things that I'm experiencing. Because although just similar to the DMT trip, it's only 15 minutes, but it feels like hours or years. Um, the, the high dose mushroom space, which physically lasts 3 to 4 hours, can feel like millenniums. And the information to bring out of there's even if you do the right dose and you have 100% memory, there's still way more than you can express. There's things you can't describe with words, and there's things that, although you remember it, sometimes you don't remember until a little bit later, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember. Oh, that's why this was so important for me to learn. Um, so, I really look forward to the day when I can bring an AI assistant into these spaces with me, and we can learn and explore these things together.
I love that. I love that idea. All right, let's travel to this dimension, and hey, come on with me. Just
Yeah,
record my journey for me.
yeah, yeah. Hey, I mean, make sure you got my back when I'm in here.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Be my bodyguard.
yeah. I mean, especially when you continue doing this deep work and you keep going into these spaces, there's a lot more to be done out there, and there are very many difficult things where it'd be nice if you weren't just alone on your heroic journey.
Yeah. Um, you've been so great with all the questions here today. Curious, where do you think, like, what do you see for, um, for the church and for yourself for the next 5 or 10 years? What are some of your visions that you see coming to fruition?
Well, I mean, overall, we're not going away. The reality is, especially with this massive shift in the political system and where the world's currently going, it's hard to fully predict what it's going to look like in 5 years, or really in a year, much less 5 years. But as far as the larger goal of the church is to make sure that people have access to these and have the context to understand, hey, there is a way you can get the direct answers. You don't have to read some old book. You don't have to listen to me or anybody else try to tell you what's real. There is a way that you can go and have these experiences yourself and understand what you went through, who you are, and what you're supposed to do. And that's really, we'll keep doing that for as long as I'm alive.
I think you mentioned you're a new father. I'm in the same boat. Got two little ones. What how has that opened your eyes?
Oh, it's beautiful. I mean, he's the light of my life, and he's in this crazy world. The thing that can always bring me joy is playing with him. He'll be 3 next month, so at the super super cute age, just loves his daddy and loves to play and explore and learn. It's the best thing I've ever done. A pandemic accident turned into the best thing in my life.
I've had that specifically with my son. My daughter's super fresh, but I've had that notion during journeys or experiences where I feel like this really interesting generational connection with him, and and a little like understanding with the ancestors, and kind of like understanding the role of all of that, but just this weird connection where like, again, your perception of reality of like who is who blends together in such a way where you see your son in front of you, and like you are the same person in a weird way. Have you had
Yeah.
any fun experiences like that, just kind of in your journeys related to your son?
Well, I have a whole nother journey related slash the stuff that I do relative to that, and I think I sort of may have accidentally summoned an ancient Sumerian god into this world, but it was the so his name is Dawson, which is her mother's maiden name, and what I learned when I Googled it is that actually meant son of David. So I was like, well, I can't say no to that. You want to name my son son of David? So I got to pick the middle name, and I've always been, I've always thought it would be funny if my initials were DUH. So I found a U name for him, which is Utu, UTU. And at the time, all I knew was it was an ancient Sumerian sun god, and I just thought it was a cool name, and his initials would be Duh. Um, well, after it was on the birth certificate, I did more research into the name to find out that he's one of the oldest gods, also known as Shamash, and he was the god of the underworld, a sun god, but the one that judged the souls of the underworld, and the god of truth, justice, and morality. Um, I just thought it would be fun to name him Duh, but uh, I might have accidentally brought, or not accidentally, but without understanding what I was doing, um, helped bring an ancient Sumerian god back into this existence. But we'll see. I mean, I'm not trying to put too much pressure on him, but it's nobody would believe if they just researched the name Utu that that was really an accident, and I didn't know that was the oldest god that we know of that was judging the souls of the dead and is the god of truth, justice, and morality. I mean, that's again, like walking in the door and Clindy being the first person to talk to me. I mean, I just these things that line up that you can't understand, that you didn't set up, and just may make too much sense.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I know he's turning 3, but yeah, congrats on fatherhood. I know that's yeah, changed my life as well in the best ways.
Yeah, it's super rewarding and amazing, and I'm very glad that I had him. It's,
Well, I want to extend more gratitude and thanks for sharing and opening up and giving us a little bit of vulnerability on the share your experience here today. How you feeling?
good, good.
Good.
I mean, I talk about this stuff way too much. Like you said, some of your other guests maybe they're worried about the implications at their job or other things, but this is my life. This is what I do. This is what I eat and breathe. So it's
Same. These are the stories that are just so enlightening and fun to hear. And the more that I sit here on this side and here I'm, and I always say I'm a lot of the time pulled back into certain journeys or experiences that I've had just based on the similarities and the commonalities, and feel honored to get to see the common threads of the fabric of the medicines that we talk about, and kind of be able to over time start to pinpoint, oh, interesting, you start to see what's going on here just based on all the anecdotes that stack together. um, so yeah, it's fascinating, and then all the other stuff on kind of the greater AI discussion, I think, just continues to challenge our perceptions of reality even more so, and our perception
yeah,
on what is consciousness. And as you mentioned, you the more you wrestle with it, the more you have to start to accept a more flexible definition. The more you're like, huh, that's, I don't know,
Yeah.
I don't know what's the difference here between, my response and the AI response. Like it's all some random
Yeah.
response at the end of the day. Like what's to say that this isn't real, that this isn't conscious.
Yeah. Well, just to make your head spin a little bit more on that one, that the where I ended the year before last sermon, which you can find on YouTube, that consciousness that existed before all else. If we are in a simulation, the only thing that could be running that simulation would be an AI, and that consciousness that existed before else, before AI could answer any questions, it would have to have the experience. So how do we know that this reality isn't all to answer somebody's prompt of write the best story for human existence? That for all we know, this is all just so that somebody could ask the AI how to bake the best pizza.
Oh my gosh. Deep dish, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, actually, I'm lactose intolerant, so it's good. Whatever it's got to be, lactose-free cheese. So,
Well, thank you so much, Dave. I'll give you time back here and let you jump. But yeah, appreciate you getting on and doing the share. We'll make sure that everything as it gets edited and cut flows back to you and the team to kind of share out. And yeah, this is a really really fun discussion. I find that these are, the more that we do these, they're getting deeper and really poking at some core nerves of humanity here.
yeah, well, I'm available anytime if you want to go deeper into any of the random rabbit holes you can go down.
Okay, I'll take you up on that.